Good morning, everybody. My name's Michael Castillo from Forbes, and I'm so excited to be here on stage with people who have actually built live production blockchain solutions. As a reporter who covers the space, I spent the last 3 years completely paranoid that I had backed the wrong horse and that blockchain wasn't going to happen. And I'm so relieved to see real, cool, awesome applications going into the world. Before we get started, as a reporter, it's my job to focus on the news. Archana, I'm so sorry. Walmart officially announced that they're a member today, and a lot of you have known that sort of behind the scenes for a while. Before we get started, I just have to focus on the news for 1 minute. Archana, why now?
Well, we are very much focused on how blockchain is going to transform our business. And we believe staying involved in the open source communities is critically important to shape how these technologies shape out in the future. So we're very excited to join. And
Hyperledger is where the open source is?
Yes,
yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of good work going on in the Linux Foundation, and Walmart has been engaged with that for quite a few years now.
Great. So if you didn't get a chance to read the news, Walmart's officially joined with 7 other new members. Go check it out online. But now that we've got the news out of the way, let's go ahead and open it up to the whole panel here. As you know, this is about live, real blockchain applications. I don't want to assume that anybody in the audience knows what these 3 brilliant human beings are doing. So let's start with that really quick. Michael, if you could get us started, just in 1 or 2 sentences, tell us what is it exactly that American Express has launched, and roughly where is it as far as maturity is concerned?
Great, and thank you. So I'm going to use a couple more sentences because we have 2 live production use cases. We launched them both in 2008, so we've been running them for over a year. The first one is a system we call Flexible Rewards, and that is a loyalty points blockchain system, and it was launched to give greater flexibility to our merchant partners in awarding those points. So they can create constructs, award points directly to card members, and then we sweep them back in so that they become part of our loyalty system. And we've grown that quite a bit and added new models and partners this year with Rakuten and Ebates joining, which is the first time we've done behavioral rewards that are not based on direct card spend, and that was kind of an exciting piece. And the second system is a system we call VVAR, for vendor invoicing and reconciliation, and that is a multi-party where we're matching the vendor timesheets with the invoices and our approvals internally, and having nodes, independent nodes, do that. We launched that, and we've expanded a bit. We have over 20 partners, including IBM, Cognizant, TCS on that, and that's been growing quite nicely over the year. And
awesome.
they're both fabric-based.
All right. Lisa?
Hello. So
Honeywell, what are you doing?
Yes, Lisa Butters from Honeywell, and I'm the general manager for Go Direct Trade, which is a marketplace for used and new aerospace parts, kind of like Auto Trader, but for aerospace. And what's really interesting about this industry is it's about $4 billion a year for the used aerospace parts, and about $0 of it is actually transacted online. The majority of the transactions are actually done via email and phone call. And so within my 1 to 2 sentences, which I've already exceeded.
I set a precedent.
Yeah, you did, a long one. And when we went in to solve the customer problem of why are people not transacting online in this particular industry, it really all boiled down to trust. And that's why we looked to blockchain technology to figure out how we manufacture trust between the buyer and the seller in this industry. And we are where we are now. We basically use it kind of like Carfax. So we try to store the part pedigree for serialized parts, and we try to bring that to the consumer. So when you're shopping online, you get as much information about that part as possible, previous owners, where it was repaired, it was overhauled, and things like that. So we're trying to make those transactions easier for consumers so they can make quicker decisions using blockchain technology.
Great.
Archana?
Hi, everyone. Archana Sristy from Walmart. I'm a technologist, and I know David asked this question before about how many technologists in the room. Can I get a show of hands of how many female technologists in the room? Woo! Shout out to all the women technologists here. You made a great decision to come here and learn more about what's going on in the blockchain space. We definitely need more females doing that. Back to our project. So you may have already be aware, but Walmart has been working since, I would say, mid-2017 on a food-based blockchain solution to track and trace food products along the supply chain. And you may ask why. The produce industry sees a lot of recalls every year, and whenever an outbreak happens, it becomes an issue for all the participants in the supply chain. And we believe keeping everybody safe and keeping health a priority within the supply chain is critically important to all participants in the supply chain for just public health. We did an early pilot in late 2016, early 2017. We took a year to work with 7 of our suppliers and 2 of our competitors to test and learn on what blockchain can do for the food space. And we officially launched our food traceability initiative in 2018, starting with leafy green vegetables. And late last year, we also expanded it to include green bell pepper suppliers. So we're very excited to be here. And if you ask us how is it going, we've seen a lot of transactions on the blockchain. And you may be aware there was a Romaine incident last year again. And we're in the process of verifying the data accuracy and completeness to get us prepped for the future.
Great. So I'm glad that you asked a question about engineers, and especially women engineers. As a non-coder, I'm making an assumption here that there might be a little bit of a divorce between the engineering process and the end user, whether or not that's a customer shopping in Walmart, or an airplane company buying a used part, or a vendor using American Express frequent flyer miles. And in the preparation for this call, or for this conversation, Archana had a chance to share what I thought was a really cool anecdote about that end user. And I do want to make sure that we take the time to talk about building those bridges between the actual human beings, whether or not they're customers, sometimes employees within our own companies, or sometimes another user. What does that look like in the real world? If you could tell us the story about how you keep it real when you're building with blockchain at Walmart.
So I'm going to share a story which was an incident that happened with me many, many years ago when I was fairly new to Walmart. As a person who's in tech, you come in, you write your code, and you don't know what exactly it's doing to people who are actually going to use the products that come out of your code. And to see that persona in Walmart, I believe you have to go to the store, actually, because I'm building all the technology for our end users who are shopping in the store. So it was just like any other evening. I picked up my child. I went to the store. I was doing my grocery shopping, and I was implementing a project which was for assisting folks who shop on the government benefit cards. And I actually had a transaction play out in front of me where somebody was shopping with that particular government benefit in the store. And it just opened my eyes to what my real customer is standing right there in front of me, and I could see how the transaction was going. And that just clicked something different in me, that this is the customer, this is the person I serve. I need to make their life easier. Now, you play that back to the work that my team and I are doing. We also shop in the same stores. We are a consumer. We are also building technology for the consumers. So that makes it full circle for us, that it's very, very important that the tech that we're rolling out is going to make our customers' life easier, save them time or money. And that's our motto, is look at your end customer. They're busy families, and we're going to save them money and help them live better.
And Michael, so building from that really neat concept of the end user and a really concrete example, first of all, as concrete as possible, who is the end user for American Express's 2 blockchain implementations? And then if you could kind of take us a little step beyond who they are and get into the technology itself, how do they interact with what you guys are building?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So specifically in the flexible reward space, our merchant partners are the users of the technology to enable a better experience for our card members. So they're going to award points in new ways, and I think the card members are the ones seeing the benefit of new points coming in, but the interactions are directly with them. And what we've done to enable faster adoption is providing an API bridge into the blockchain so that these partners who may not have tech teams that are deep on blockchain technology, but are very familiar with RESTful endpoints and can just implement an API. We give them a kit which we've open sourced so they can see and trust the entire bit of the code. And this gives them that level of trust in the technology. So any reconciliation problems have disappeared on that front. But they're able to, one, take this package, see the code, implement very quickly, and then we can help them with hosting, we can help them with upgrades, we can help them with getting to the production state, which has allowed us to onboard partners much more quickly than if we asked them to do the heavy lifting.
And I liked what you, when we were talking earlier, you shared a little bit about the opportunity that the end user has to lift up the proverbial hood and look underneath and kind of understand from a technology perspective what's going on there. You say at this early stage of development, there's not a lot of people lifting up that hood quite yet. Could you explain what is it that's going on there? Is that something that you think people will want to do in the future, or is that more indicative of user behavior going on?
So I think part of it is that we've always had trust with our partners in terms of the brand. American Express has a strong brand, and our partners do trust us, but we've always had challenges around reconciliation because they look at the system and say, oh wait, is there an error? Is there a coding problem? And that's why our internal reconciliation doesn't match up. Giving them full visibility to the code base that's running and know that the trust is in the technology has kind of eliminated that, because they're reconciling their internal systems with the blockchain node, and if there's any problems, they look at the source code directly. We don't know to what extent they're doing that, but at the same time, because they have that openness and we don't have to promise that the systems have integrity, we've gotten to that point very quickly.
Great. And Lisa, I love the fact that your application is actually something that isn't a modern version of something that's already been digitized, but that it's really new. You can't do this online without this technology. So could you talk to us a little bit about what was going on at the back end in the old system and how you have integrated all of those systems into one single access point for the end user? And is that then given to them via an API or through some others?
Sure. So in general, the aerospace industry is, as innovative as it is, we're putting people into the air and we're flying people safely. The industry it's really slow and it's not very transparent in general. And with used aerospace parts and aerospace parts in general, things like price, product images, quality documents, which are really the thing that makes a part worth anything, those things are really not transparent to the consumer today. It's just not part of the experience, and it's not the expectation of the consumer to get all of these things that we get every day from like an Amazon or a Target or wherever we shop from.
Now, before you go on, I'm going to interrupt you there.
Yeah.
Because I think before you explain the solution, we need to pause and just, can you guys raise your hand if you knew that there were used airplane parts in your airplane when you flew here?
Yeah.
All right. Now raise your hand if you were totally surprised to learn that there were used airplane parts in your airplane when you flew here. All right, so
but how many of you know where those parts were used before?
Yeah, where were they used before? And also how many times? So if you could, if you would give us that number, how many times is the average part reused? And then tell us a little bit more about how you make sure that when we're flying here, those used parts are safe.
This is like a safety seminar. Okay, so the average number of times that a used aerospace part changes hands is about 4. Which is pretty crazy, because if you think about maybe used automotive parts, you get something off your Corolla, it might change hands one time and then it's scrapped out. But in aerospace, these are high dollar parts. The average order that goes to Go Direct Trade is about $10,000, and we even have multi-million-dollar engines listed on our site that are used. And so people, airlines, private operators, they want to keep their aircraft flying at an economical, in an economical way. And in order to do that, you have to continue to service, repair, and overhaul aircraft parts and make sure they're safe. That's why, from an FAA perspective, certification to get parts airworthy, to reinstall back into an aircraft, it's very, very stringent. And another reason why your aircraft part is worth nothing if you don't have the paperwork that goes along with it. Yeah.
So let's switch gears here a little bit and bring in the audience a little bit more. I want to talk about the role that open source plays in each of your projects. And in order to do that, I want to pull the audience one more time. And you are allowed to vote more than once, so please keep your hands up if you are building with any of these implementations. So raise your hand if you're using Sawtooth. Cool. Raise your hand if you're using Burrow. Cool. Raise your hand if you're using Fabric. Besu. Quilt. How many of you raised your hands for more than one of those? Awesome. All right, so what I want to ask everybody on stage, and we'll just go down the line, start on your side, we'll get a little conversation going here, but what role are you guys seeing open source developers play in fighting what we used to call vendor lock-in phobia, and B, ensuring that all of your platforms might eventually live in a future where they interact?
I can take that. I think that's one of the reasons why we announced our membership, why we are a member. I think it's very important for the open source community to understand interoperability is going to be critically important in the future. And we're looking to this community to define what that looks like. I know there's some great work going on within this community, like Michael just mentioned. There's also some work going on with Ethereum, with EVM running in a Fabric. But I want us all to consider what those on-chain transactions may look like in the future, because I think it will be too presumptive to think that everybody is going to be on the same framework. Because as an end-user company, we're going to see all variations of that, right? We've got thousands of suppliers, thousands of vendors, and if we're trying to build a network where we can't assume everybody will be on the same network using the same framework.
And are you actively engaging with open source developers? Are you having meetings where they're asking you questions about what's wrong, what doesn't work? How does that actually look like in the real world?
We have developers at Walmart who are participating in this open source community. They're here. And we look forward to much bigger participation with our membership.
Just one thing I would add is, so Honeywell they're a huge company. They're a Fortune 100 company, and like any other huge company out there, everyone's kind of mindset is that your data is your data, right? We all have these very big walled garden approaches to keeping our data safe because we all want to monetize it in the future. So for a Honeywell, blockchain is a huge paradigm shift. It is breaking the walls of those walled gardens and connecting with others and sharing data, which that just blows people's minds at Honeywell. And for us, using Hyperledger Fabric was one way which we could ensure we have an enterprise-grade, highly secure platform where we could chain of chains effect, right? Connect with others, whether it's a mom and pop or repair shop or another Fortune 100 company, we have that interoperability.
Anything you want to add from an interoperability perspective?
I mean, we chose to be part of this community because we saw the future focus, and interoperability is key. And we won't be able to do that ourselves. So we turned to the whole community to bring that in and promise the future interoperability, even if it's not required on our production use cases. And it's very similar to the way that I pointed out we were sharing the code that we give our partners to make it easy for them. It's the same thing, just on a much grander scale in the future.
Are there any specific pain points that you're dealing with the choices that you've made for the technology and desires to work with other partners that are on other platforms? Are there any real-world examples that you can give where interoperability has been an actual obstacle towards either working with a partner or bringing on somebody new?
I think for us, it's not necessarily a technology problem of connecting. It's finding collaborators that actually want to connect with you. That is the real world that we're dealing with, which is within aerospace, people talk a lot about blockchain, but there aren't a whole lot of companies that are actually building real production applications that are really making a difference in the world. And so for Honeywell, it is winning over big name collaborators so that perception-wise, we can get this industry going in the right direction. Yeah. And that's really our biggest challenge, is finding companies that will legitimately collaborate, build applications with you, connect your data together, and share.
In these early days, we see networks kind of popping up, and if we don't have a way to connect into all of them, it presents a challenge that we're building our abstraction layers to connect to all the different networks today, and that's not as scalable as a truly interoperable network.
Now, in the early days of the first blockchain application, Bitcoin, and closely followed by other cryptocurrencies, there was this really naive, beautiful sentiment that all ships rise. I think there was about a 6-month period in 2011 or 12 where people actually really believed that it didn't matter which cryptocurrency you used or which blockchain you used, that the adoption was the most important part. We've seen that not play out very well in the cryptocurrency world, where these cryptocurrencies are going after each other pretty aggressively, and there's a real sense of limited market supply. Yeah. I'm curious, are you seeing the all ships rise mentality exist within the non-cryptocurrency applications of blockchain? Or to put it another way, has working with blockchain changed your relationship with the competition?
Our first use case on blockchain is food safety. And food safety is not a space where companies come and compete. Food safety is an area where all companies agree to come and solve for the general public. So we actually invited our competitors to sit with us and form the ecosystem there with the food blockchain network that we have. Because you need the greater minds to come and shape how this eventually shapes out for everybody. And back to your earlier question, I would add, sorry, I forgot what your question was. It just started and I just lost it.
Are there any examples of where you've sort of proactively gone out and reached out to competitors and said, hey, let's work together? Or is it more of a passive thing where you just find yourself in the same boardroom and agree to work together?
Yeah. So, the food is a space where we've invited our competitors to sit with us on the ecosystem. But just from a protocol perspective, there's a regulation for pharma industry, right? The DSCSA, Drug Supply Chain Security Act. Walmart conducted 2 pilots last year. They're both completely different flavors of blockchain. You've got Hyperledger Fabric on one side and then Ethereum on the other, right? So there's going to be so many networks that might emerge to address the DSCSA requirement. Again, from that aspect, I think the interop becomes even more important. Are you expecting everybody to be on the same network across the pharma industry?
So go ahead, Michael.
And then in jumping in on the value of a lot of these distributed networks come when you have multiple parties come in and play even the same role to enable that competition to happen. So interoperability becomes a problem if everyone's on separate nodes, but I think we're still at such an early stage in adoption that we just have to get the competitors to be on the same one to get that network effect of, look at the credit card industry. There's multiple players and merchants accept multiple cards. We have to get to a point where that's the same thing that's happening within a network where information is exchanged and we come in, play our role, but other parties do the same. And I think when you talk about the relationship with competitors, we're very happy to see competitors because we want to get that network effect to jumpstart some of these opportunities.
Until interoperability is real and concrete and battle tested, do we in fact just live in a world where it's kind of important where people are building on the same platform?
I think that's where we are now.
Yeah. So to put it another way, interoperability is key to diversification of adoption. What role has fear of vendor lock-in played to your own building process? Do you think that companies that are looking to come in are afraid that they're going to start building on the wrong platform and that's preventing them from getting started in the first place?
In my case, I don't think it's the selection of the technology platform. It really is just, being influential enough within your organization to have to start developing applications. I mean, that's how it is within aerospace. I think that is somebody in your organization committed to spending R&D to start building applications, to start influencing with your competitors, right, to build out an ecosystem. I really think that for us, that is the biggest problem in aerospace. It is getting the real life use cases worked on, getting the right influence in an organization, and then bringing it all together.
Yeah,
I think it's a little bit of both.
Okay.
And I do agree with the point you made earlier. There are companies that are afraid of vendor lock-in. And I think in the true spirit of what decentralization for all of the blockchain applications was meant to be, it has to be architected that way, to keep it open for other parties to join seamlessly, look under the hood when they need to, and stay back if they don't want to look under the hood. But it needs to be open and inviting and decentralized in that fashion. But yes, educating your partners on what it is and it isn't, and breaking down those barriers of, hey, is my data public for everyone, or do I have any control over my data? So we leaned on the governance council within our food blockchain network to tackle those kind of decision-making points on data permissioning, data ownership, et cetera, so that everybody is actually coming together and deciding how this should work, versus just one company going and saying this is how it's going to work. But I think it's a step-by-step process in the industry. They start with something smaller and control, and then open up the control. But I think the true spirit of blockchain is decentralization. And that's the North Star we need to get to.
Awesome.
Yeah, and I wouldn't say that we're at that point of vendor lock-in fear or even network lock-in fear, because we know that the open source communities are behind many of these different technologies, so that the promise of interoperability is there in the future. But even if you're on a network, because of the openness of the code, we're not talking about vendor lock-in, you're talking about network lock-in, which is not nearly as much of a fear concept.
What about after it goes live? The difficulties of managing changes on a distributed system. Could you talk to us a little bit about, once you've made your decision or built a couple of parallel proofs of concept and kind of tested which one does what better and how they may or may not interoperate, once you've made that decision, once you've started writing smart contract code on top of that, once you've perhaps started letting real world transactions with actual value moving, how do you change? Is it more difficult to pivot, and how do you overcome that?
So we have an advanced tech team that does kind of all the monitoring and controls on our network. And for Honeywell, we actually have over 70 global physical sites around the world. And we use SAP as our ERP system. We've linked our ERP system to our ledger, so things like the manufacturing birth event, sale of product, repairs, everything that happens to our parts inside of our ERP system, those events are actually written directly to the ledger as soon as those things happen. So that is like a living, breathing manufacturing ecosystem that we have in place that we're trying to expand out with other suppliers. Those transactions, I think, as an example, they go astronomically high. Every 2 seconds we manufacture a part. We repair 10,000 units, every couple weeks. So by sheer numbers alone, we really just did not really expect all these transactions on our network. And so it was this thing where, as soon as we started to see that it was kind of overflowing and things were slowing down, we had to figure out very quickly, how to pivot, get more space, level load it better, figure out how do we, bring in these transactions. And I think it was a matter of, unless you do it, that's why I just do it, right? Do it, try it, and then figure it out. You will figure it out, and then just pivot.
And in our case, because we're playing a primary role that's different than some of the other partners on the network, we've also taken on the responsibility of driving that. And the API abstraction layers that we've given to our partners and put in place allow us to play the role of pushing the upgrades. And I think that in other blockchains, we're going to have to figure that out on a wider network, and that's where maybe interoperability between versions of things become very critical.
So I think that difference is actually a really good opportunity to turn and talk a little bit about difference in governance models. Archana, you had a chance to briefly talk about the Food Trust Network, and Michael, you mentioned your own sort of leading position within the governance there. But I'd like to ask if all three of you could kind of unpack that a little bit. I'm going to put Lisa on the spot because she's the only one we haven't heard talk about that specifically. Can you unpack a little bit? What does governance look like at GoDirect?
So we have a permission-based blockchain, but one question that always comes into play is how do you authenticate or allow people to come onto your blockchain and do transactions, whether viewing or writing to the ledger? And because we're storing part pedigree data, our goal is to build out an ecosystem where we figure out as much as possible about that serialized part. So we hook up to aircraft dismantlers, we hook up to repair shops, we hook up to OEMs. And in order to do that, you have to be able to authenticate them and have some kind of governance to make sure that the people on your network and the people writing to your ledger are, they are safe to do that. Because we're dealing with aircraft parts, we want to be safe. What we do is based off of the persona of the entity that's trying to come on. For example, an aircraft dismantler, we will look at digital certifications, like are you part of AFRA? That is the Aircraft Dismantler Association. So we try to look at digital ways to authenticate these particular users based off of what they're supposed to be. If they're an OEM manufacturer facility for component parts, we go to ISO 9000, we look to see what their credentials are, and then we try to figure out through APIs how do we digitally get that data so that when a user comes on and they want to write to our ledger, they want to look at transactions, we could try to authenticate them. Now, is this like a perfect science that we figured out? No, but that's pretty much the framework that we're using to try to build some kind of like digital identity authentication for that particular company that's trying to get on.
It's interesting because we have similar things where we have to help partners because we want the network effect. How much help are you giving?
So much help. I mean, so much help. This is like, but we are so convinced, I mean, I personally am so convinced that this is like the wave of the future for especially aerospace, an industry that's so heavily governed with quality standards that we've even like created a node, like given a dismantler the hardware and installed it in the UK so that we could test that we were sending transactions. I mean, we will do anything, right, to get this technology moving forward because we firmly believe that it's a game changer for aerospace.
It's not that different.
Oh, I'm sorry, Michael.
No, it's not that different in terms of because we want folks on board, you wind up doing a lot to help. But sorry to cut off there.
Yeah, no, not at all. Thank you. Archana,
So the food industry, if I just talk about food trust, the food industry is very, very different from aircraft industry. Obviously, you've got all kind of players in here. You've got small farmers, you've got medium-sized companies, and then large companies. We sit on the advisory board for the governance council for food trust, as you just mentioned, and they tackle a lot of things for the network, like data permissioning, data ownership, data privacy through the data permissioning. Each participant can actually permission who sees their data if they're working within their supply chain. And then you've got farmers whose systems are not at all digitized, and the question then becomes, how do you keep the onboarding of a farmer as simple as using their the smartphone, in this case, which is more powerful than a computer was many, many years ago. So that's the kind of decisions they make, and also the design decisions within the network itself. And going back to your earlier question about how do you manage the change through this process, I think it'll be very interesting for the community here to understand that just like you load out any other system, in the first phase you realize you made some design decisions that look great at the time, but now you've got actual data behind it. Do you change your design there, or do you keep it as is? And how many people are you impacting in the process, right? If you look back at how many of your participants are in that network, and how is that design actually going to shift what they have to build into their integration systems to now send you this data. So those kind of decisions go back to the governance council as well on making changes to the system.
And
we've been fortunate or not fortunate, but I think that we saw that first step as easier since we were playing a role as the only loyalty points on our network, but know that we can go to a governance model as a second step when we allow other points systems to be integrated. So I think when you look at your governance model, you can sort of say, take it in 2 steps or take it in one bigger step, which I think is the case that you're facing.
Michael, I'm going to thank you. You set me up perfectly for my last question. You didn't even know it. But there is the concept of graded governance, and it might be easier for some users to launch with sort of more of dictatorial, single leadership-driven philosophy, and I've heard a lot of great arguments for that, in spite of the sort of purists in the public blockchain world who just think that just isn't what blockchain is. And then there's a step towards more decentralized governance. But there is also that third step, and we're seeing in the financial space, DeFi, decentralized finance, this talk of people who are building smart contract infrastructures that are slowly becoming increasingly self-sustaining, and then handing those over to nonprofit bodies, and perhaps someday removing any sort of non-smart contract-based governance at all, where it's really completely automated and the original code creators sort of write themselves out of existence. That's the ultimate efficiency, right? Is anyone even looking at that third and final step of the dictatorial, leadership-driven, the governance version, and then the DeFi equivalent, but for supply chain?
We're just not there yet.
Yeah.
I mean, we're not there yet, but ultimately, yes, that's how we want this thing to run. The aerospace manufacturing process is highly complex, but there is so much inefficiency inside of our supply chain because of auditing, because of making sure that things are coming from where they're supposed to come from, because of making sure that suppliers are of good quality. And a lot of those inefficiencies can be solved through what everyone's trying to solve, which is really like traceability, right? And so I think that we're just not there yet, but ultimately, yeah, where we want to head is in that direction.
So DeFi has such a nice ring. We'll use the term DSUP. Doesn't sound nearly as good, but decentralized supply chain. Anything that is that something that Walmart's interested in, or do you think that the governance model where everyone has a
No.
No.
We're here to learn.
Yeah.
We're here to learn, and that's exactly why we are part of this open source community. And we're not there yet, just like Lisa mentioned about Honeywell, but we're here to learn. But that's our goal.
What do you think, Michael?
Yeah, I think that's the North Star that everyone part of this community sees as the way to get there, where we have this trusted, open communication mechanism that allows us to invent all new business models.
Wrapping things up in one sentence, can you all tease us with something that's coming up in the future? Michael, put you on the spot.
We have a bunch of proof of concepts.
Can you give us one?
One that I like is where there's an open exchange of information already happening on a network, and American Express comes in and plays the role of payment settlement agent, payment provider.
Cool. Lisa.
Yeah. Climate accounting with utility companies globally.
Awesome. Archana.
We'll be adding more commodities to the food network, and we conducted 2 pilots for pharma industry last year. So that's another one that's going to be coming out in the future, right, for DSCSA. And we're also experimenting with global trade.
Awesome. I want to thank you all so much. I think blockchain is probably the only business in the world that had to defend that it was real or not. And I appreciate you guys all helping make that real from a storytelling perspective. It's much more interesting. And I'd like to ask the audience if you could join me in a round of applause thanking the panelists.
Thank you, Paul.